Hello and welcome to Innovation with Leadership series by ETBFSI. In this series, we bring the top voices of the industry who are transforming the lending landscape through new tools and technology. Well, in today's episode, we are joined by Mr. Ranga Reddy, who is CEO and whole-time director at Maveric System. Hello, sir, and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Sir, to begin the conversation, first thing I would like to understand from you that as a technology partner, how the transformation has happened from bank-led tech player to AI and operations transformation, which is happening in the BFSI space.
Yeah. So over the last 25 years that we have been serving the leading banking players across the globe, we emphasize very much on having a very deep domain knowledge, and with that domain knowledge, assisting customers with regard to their transformation journey. In the initial stages, their digital transformation journey, in a later stage, their data transformation journey, and in the recent past, their transformation of operations as well as technology, leveraging the AI and ML capabilities. So if you actually look at it, these three waves, that's actually one, the digital wave, followed by the data wave, and in the recent past, especially in the last 24 months, the AI and ML maturity has given another opportunity to radically transform both the banking operations as well as the way technology is handled within the bank. So we, as a niche banking technology player, have been keeping pace with the changing technology and emerging demands of the bank, and from time to time repositioning ourselves to be most relevant to our customers. So today we are fully committed to leverage AI for the operations and technology transformation within the banking and financial services industry, which in my opinion is something that almost all the IT service providers across the globe are grappling with as to how to reposition themselves, not just from the angle of positioning in the market, more importantly with regard to reconfiguring the competencies that are required to leverage AI fully in order to create the requisite impact within the industry.
So talking about AI, there is a term called contextual AI. So in a layman language, can you explain that how this is playing out? And secondly, how this is reshaping compliance and customer experience for the lending players?
Yeah. Like for example, all of you must be listening to music on Spotify. And on 1st of January, I got a message from Spotify saying that these are the kind of music that you have actually heard over the last years. On top of this, top of the list was Suprabhatam. Suprabhatam is actually a thing that we play in the morning to invoke, spiritual essence. So from that angle, the AI that was used in Spotify thinks that Suprabhatam is music. So it means it missed the context. So contextual AI is one which understands that all music is not music, especially a religious bhajan is actually not music, rather it is actually something else. A contextual AI is one that understands the context rather than generalizes the thing. So if you heard your Gen AI is generalized to an extent. So whereas contextual AI actually takes all the enterprise knowledge, the bank's internal knowledge, and then utilizes that in order to give you a response which is far more contextual. So to that extent, contextual AI is something that enterprises need to invest. They can't leverage a generic AI model which is LLM, which is there with the big tech, and use it in a way that is going to be highly contextual. So to that extent, contextual AI is something that you pick an LLM and then subsequently you pump in the requisite enterprise information and knowledge into it, and thus make it highly relevant to the kind of context in which you want to use it. For example, if you take a bank which is primarily focusing on lending, a generic LLM would definitely have enough and more information with regard to what is a lending process. But the minute you actually feed that LLM or build an SLM with all the enterprise knowledge around lending, by virtue of getting it to actually have an access to the documents, reports, and the information that you have on customers, then it becomes that much more center or contextual to your own business, and that's what we mean by contextualizing the AI. So that's been a very big challenge to most of the industries, and banking is highly regulated. So data is very sensitive, and there are a lot of regulations governing as to what you can use and what you cannot use. So to that extent, it's a complex job to get your AI to be far more contextual, and that's a challenge some of us are working on right now with our customers.
Sir, as you said that what you can use and what you cannot use is something that is in the ambit of the regulator, and there has to be some guardrails which everyone mentions in the BFSI space. But one issue or challenge that these players are face is around the data lineage and auditability. So how do you see that the tech players like you can help the BFSI players to overcome this, or maybe smoothen the process?
See, in the AI itself, there is a stream which is called explainable AI. Many a times when you actually use an LLM, when you are playing around with regard to one prompt that you give and say, who were the prime ministers of India over the last X number of years, it will throw out some data. And even if you would have seen that, it actually gives you reference in terms of where it picked that information. So similarly, the explainable AI is something that actually gives you the entire traceability when it actually throws out a particular output, be it in the GenAI context or be it in the agentic AI context. We do have tools right now which are both proprietary tools that are being built by the banks, as well as the tools that are built by the big tech. They have a kind of a ability to give you the entire explainability as to how a particular outcome has been arrived at. So using that explainable AI, we are in a position to actually get the auditability of any activity that has been supported by AI, and to that extent be in a position to audit it as necessary, and sometimes even fine tune it if it is not in the right, what you call, level of accuracy. So explainable AI is the solution there.
Sir, when we talk about catering to the customers, like if it is from your side to the BFSI player, or maybe from the banking and NBFC to their customer, personalization is something that required at both the end. And nowadays, they are looking for, it won't be wrong to say like Netflix like personalization. So according to you, how AI and new tools can bring this thing into the picture? And second, there is one thing which is called trust, which is there in the banking space since the beginning. So how we can do that while maintaining that trust and sanctity?
Okay. So I'll talk to you with an example. There is a financial institution by name Revolut based out of UK, and it has banking, it has travel related services, it has what you call forex, and it also has investment advisory. Revolut has a track record of actually having such a hyper customized messaging to not only their customers but also prospects, wherein in a 3-week period it could actually mobilize 1 million new customers. It has at this point of time approximately somewhere above 35 million customers, and they were in a position to actually do 1 million customers acquisition in a short period of 21 days. So that's the kind of potential that you have with regard to AI and its ability to actually work on the front end. Front end means customer acquisition side, or using AI and simulation, finding out what products would be best fitted or suited for the customers that they have on board, and similarly what kind of risks are likely to be associated with that kind of a customer base for a given product. The risk could also be easily identified, and thus be in a position to have products that are right for the customers and products that have minimized risk when it comes to actually being offered to the population. So, from that angle there are very good examples. However, at this point of time, if you see, most of the AI investments are not focused on the front end. If you take the top 50 banks that have analyzed by in the recent past by one of the analysts, 75% of the entire AI investments are primarily for internal consumption, not for the customer. In the remaining 25%, there are certain initiatives that have been taken up with regard to the front ending, that is something related to customer experience or something to related to giving an ability for the customer to do certain analysis. So, to that extent, most of the effort right now is directed in terms of productivity gains with regard to the bank's employees as compared to the customers. But as I said, Revolut is a good example wherein the potential exists to actually hyper customize products, hyper customize messaging, and thus be in a position to actually have minimal cost for customer acquisition, and at the same time multiply your revenue from the same set of customers to a large extent.
Another crucial aspect that I would like to discuss with you is that, as we mentioned, that trust is the key in the lending business, and fraud prevention is something on which even the government of India is very active, and coming out. Even RBI is coming out with guidelines on a regular basis, and cybersecurity is also something on which everyone is working and focusing. And I think now the IT spend is also increasing with time, and more work is being done in this direction. So, from your experience, how this contextual AI can play its role in fraud detection and prevention, as well as maintaining that seamless customer experience for the banking players?
So, if I'll take two scenarios. If you broadly look at banking industry, be it in the US or be it in the India, three things that plague the banks is, one is NPA. Approximately 2% of the annual revenue or annual income would be the non-productive assets. And in the US, you are talking about a overall banking revenue in the approximate range of 1.5 trillion. So, NPA itself would be something like 2% of the, so it is about 30 billion is the NPA that you could probably end up with across the banking industry in a given year. Now, if you take the second aspect, which is fraud, fraud is anywhere between up to 3%, which is coming to 7 billion in the American context. In our own Indian context, in the current financial year 2025, they are expecting that our fraud related losses could be in the range of 36,000 crores, 36,000 crores. And the third aspect, especially in the overseas market, that plagues the bank is the regulatory fines, which are usually in the range of about 0.2%. So, if you look at it, there is a potential to save the 2% of the NPA, that is almost a 30 billion, and the fraud which is in the 7 billion range, and regulatory fines which is in the 1 billion range. So, it is something like across the industry there is a potential of at the minimum 38 billion to realize. If you can't realize all of it, even if you realize 30% to begin with and then come to 50%, that is what is left on the table to actually benefit from. The second aspect, if you actually look at the overall banking cost, the front end cost related to the customer acquisition, marketing, product development, risk modeling could be to an extent of 25% of the cost. The 75% of the cost is related to customer servicing. So, at this point of time, we already have a lot of people working on this 75% of the cost. They are yet to actually come, as you said, onto the customer experience. So, cybersecurity, compliance, regulatory and operations is definitely in the focus, which forms 75% of the operation cost. It will reduce the costs. But as I said, if you can reduce NPA, if you could minimize fraud, and if you can actually save yourself from the regulatory fines, that 38 billion is on the table for people to benefit from. So, this is what is there on the table. Earlier, using rule based systems like which are all prescriptive in nature, because it is always based on hindsight. Oh, this is likely to be done by the fraudster. So, I program or create a rule, and that rule is applied to actually make sure that fraud does not happen. But fraudsters evolve on a hourly basis, not even a daily basis. So, they are changing their own methods. So, the rule based systems were not able to do that, whereas the pattern recognition is a core strength of AI. So, it recognizes the pattern and thus be in a position to actually educate itself, be in a position, it evolves as the fraudsters methods evolve. So, from that angle, AI gives you a far better ability to control or otherwise minimize, be it fraud. Similarly, you are scenario planning on a 20-year basis if you have to do, so that you actually identify potential NPA that is possible today with the computing power and the AI/ML models that we have as compared to the past. And similarly, with regard to regulatory, there are already mature tools that are available to make sure that you are largely compliant. So, to that extent minimizing risk. So, there are multiple ways in which you could be looking at. One is to increase your revenue, reduce your loss, and reduce your cost of operation. These are the three dimensions. Most of the time right now, over the last 25 years, 24 months, the effort is more on reducing costs. We are just about making inroads into increasing revenue, increasing customer satisfaction. And the real issues with regard to how to minimize NPA, how to minimize fraud, and how to make sure that you do not get into regulatory fines is still yet to be attempted for real benefits to accrue.
So now coming to another question, I think this is one of my favorite topics which I really love to discuss with all the tech players, is that fintechs are coming to the picture, and then big tech firms are there, and traditional IT players are there, who are giving a kind of support and partnership to the banks and the lenders. So in this context, what differentiates the domain focused players, and what different they can do, and how they can sustain the business in this atmosphere?
See, let me take the context of an agentic AI. Agentic AI presupposes that you know the persona of a person who is doing a piece of work in the bank. It basically means, like, if you are a credit underwriter, you need to be knowing the day of a underwriter, the week of the underwriter, the month of the underwriter. So, from that angle, if you are to really get into agentic AI, you need to be a practitioner. If you are a practitioner, it comes very easy to say these are the 7 personas that actually are involved with regard to approving a particular loan application. And then probably you will be in a position to configure those personas, and hopefully the enterprise data is appropriately curated to support these personas, and thus you are in a position to automate the entire process, if not to the fullest extent of being autonomous, but at least having some kind of a supervision. But most of the activity gets done by these agentic agents who subscribe to each one of those personas. From that angle, agentic AI, if you really want to master, you need a deep understanding of the domain, not at the industry level, but specifically at a particular product level within a bank, be it lending, be it payments, be it wealth management. So, to that extent, domain is very important if you need to really be in a position to contribute in the agentic AI space. So, apart from that, as you said, context is domain, or context is domain plus technology. So, to that extent, you need both of them in order to be in a position to contribute effectively, especially in the current what you call wave of transformation.
Just a follow up to this, like fintechs, neobanks, they are doing pretty well in terms of personalization as well. And if we look at the new generation, then they are more friendly towards this mobile apps and getting their all payments done and on the banking services also on their phone in a click, just a click away. So in this atmosphere, how do you see that the traditional banks can compete with them? Do you feel that anything new that they need to do, or any observation that you have?
See, there is a misnomer that fintechs have actually started getting benefits because of AI. That is not so. Three reasons why fintechs perform good or better than the average industry standard is: number one, focus. Fintechs do not offer products like that of a bank, which has a varied product range. So, fintechs normally choose 2 or 3 products. Like I told you about Revolut, it actually has 5 products. And it also chooses a particular customer segment. And then fintechs have the advantage of subscribing to a tech stack which is cloud native. And they also do not have the what you call the pain of having legacy that you need to live with. And some of the fintechs have actually used ML in the past, AI now. So, to that extent, it is not that all fintechs have actually been looking at their offering in an AI native basis all along. Only in the recent past AI and ML is coming in, but otherwise most of the advantage they really derived is based on focus, selected product, selected customer segment, and a very advantaged tech stack. At this point of time, the same AI, if you look at AI application, like for example, one of the largest efforts that goes on in a bank is there are multiple data sources that you need to draw from and make an inference and do a decision. If you crack the problem with regard to one particular product, it becomes easier to multiply that in multiple products. So, the leverage of AI that you can do, or otherwise investment, if you do one use case and you apply that use case wherever it is possible across the bank. So, the return on that investment is going to be multiple in a larger bank as compared to a fintech which has a limited operations or limited products. So, to that extent, as long as the bank has a sentiment and capability to absorb competency, AI application competency, the return on investments could be far more in a larger entity like a say universal bank as compared to a fintech. The only advantage fintech has is they have a tech stack that is far more what you call new to date or contemporary. So, that block is the only thing that I see the big banks having, that is because they need to carry the legacy technology. Otherwise, I think they have equal potential, and more importantly, a given use case can be multiplied in say multiple contexts and thus leveraging maximum return on investment for any given case. So, the question is in terms of when you drive a small bike versus when you drive a large vehicle, that entire maneuverability is the question, and that maneuverability is possible only through competency in absorbing and applying AI.
Well, sir, thank you for noting down a very valid point on mannerability of driving the whole ecosystem. Now, if we understand that there are 3 very crucial aspects in the BFSI for any lending business in the BFSI space, which is compliance, customer experience, and operations. And for them, for 3 of these, players are now bringing AI into the picture. So, yeah, as per your experience or your expert view, which sector do you see among these 3 that is going to yield highest ROI in next 3 to 5 years with the use of AI?
Yeah. If you are looking at customer acquisition and retention, see the different banks have different focuses. Some people are actually very eager to acquire more or retain all their customers and maximize revenue per customer, then you definitely need to go into the category of customer experience. And there, at this point of time, I would say only 20% of the top 50 banks that have been analyzed, or 9 out of the 50 banks are actually working in that space. That is a space you maximize revenue, whereas the remaining banks, like for example, out of the 50 banks, 47 are saying we are working on the operations and the compliance space. And operations and compliance space is also not customer facing, it is internal. So, to an extent it is a natural first choice for any bank to apply, learn before they actually take the risk of putting AI in the hands of the customer. Now, even in those banks that are actually working with AI in a customer facing manner, retail banks are doing a lot more investment, followed by wealth management companies, investment management, wealth management companies, capital markets and wealth management companies, and then followed by corporate. So, to that extent, retail is a place where you are actually seeing a lot of work happening with regard to customer experience, and wealth is the second one, and corporate is yet to really embrace it fully.
Well, sir, thank you for answering all of the question. But before we wrap up this conversation, one last thing that I would like to understand from you, that in your point of view, by 2030, what one major transformation that you foresee in the BFSI space, and how this is going to happen?
Okay. More than foreseeing, many a times the future is visible in the present. You would have heard of the Right Bank from Malaysia, which announced itself as the first AM native bank. And so, now the question is, could there be a way in which a established bank come closer to being a native bank, and thus have an ability to operate across the globe with a very wide cross section of products, what we called earlier called universal banks. See, somewhere Europe was very open to universal banking. US was already regulated with regard to not to promote universal banking, that is, make a single bank do retail, corporate, wealth, capital markets. They were regulated. Only in late 1990s they actually became less regulated, and thus banks could do, if they choose to, operate across the globe, operate across the segments within the bank, retail, corporate, wealth and capital markets. Now, that becomes a possibility with AI, universal banking. So, it is possible that whatever universal banks were actually declining, and if they get their act right with regard to running operations, running compliance, running customer acquisition with a lot more AI native outlook, it is possible that there could actually be once again a revival of universal bank. That is one possibility. Now, possibilities could also be contrary. The other potential possibility that I foresee is, banks always did two things. They did a advisory work, and then they executed that advice. They did a fee for advisory. They also took a fee or a transaction fee for executing the decision that you accepted to out of the recommendation. There is a good potential that individuals and corporates may use AI and take the advisory and use the bank only for execution. So, to that extent, the two sides of the coin that the banks play today, as an advisory fee as well as the execution fee, there is a good threat that advisory fee may go away, either to the corporates themselves or individuals themselves, or some intermediary may come and do that, and banks get to only execute it. So, there is another contrary scenario that I foresee, wherein they actually become execution vehicles. Nevertheless, as I said, banks are here to stay, and I only see them with the power of AI and ML becoming more and more capable of eliminating waste, the waste of NPA, the waste of fraud, the waste of regulatory thing. the waste related to 75% of the costs being operations. In fact, you would probably, when you reduce that, you could probably do a lot more with regard to investments in customer acquisition and customer experience. So, from that angle, I think there's a good opportunity for the banks to really become far more agile and profitable in the 5 to 10-year period, because there is already a cry, who want to cry about ROI of AI. Now, if you look at the entire digital world, I think if you give it a credit that it only started in 2000, it's 25 years old, and digital was in the beginning, just the front end part was digital, the rest was all archaic. And over a period of 15 years, the digital became pervasive, front office, middle office, back office. So, to that extent, it took 15 years for digital to give full benefit of its potential. Now, it is about, say, if you really give it a generous time, 3 years since AI has been out of the lab and people have been using in the industry. And in that 3 years, most of the time, especially say even half the time, has gone into actually understanding, learning and applying. If you really are generous, maybe in the last 18 months is where you actually can count to be a period wherein you can look at, what is the investment and what is the return. My suggestion is, if you give a 5-year horizon, and number 2, make AI not a sporadic activity in certain parts of the organization, but make it more pervasive. You would have heard AI at scale. So, you take a particular, like for example, you take NPA and say I want to kill NPA, that is like one part of AI at scale. So, there are 3 parts, as I said: operations, how do I minimize, and thus how do I become more and more effective in customer experience and customer acquisition, that is revenue maximizing. How do I actually get into eliminating fraud and eliminating any compliance related problems. If you put them all together and work on a 5-year horizon to 10-year horizon, the gains would be tremendous as compared to the current scenario wherein we are already getting perturbed with regard to return on investment.
Well, sir, thank you so much for giving some, a broader and a clear picture over contextual AI and very well, noted points about customer experience, compliance and operations and how they are going to transform the BFSI space in the coming year. And most importantly, sir, removal of waste, which we are also going to, observe very closely to see that what transformation it is bringing in terms of fraud prevention and NPAs and other challenges that the BFSI space is witnessing. Thank you so much for giving your valuable time and talking to us.
Thank you.
Stay tuned to ETBFSI for more updates.